Welcome back, everyone. Today, we've got an explainer that dives into a story completely woven into the DNA of modern music. It's a tale that mixes legendary, raw creative greatness with literally a modern-day Shakespearean tragedy. We're talking monumental talent, completely fractured loyalty, and devastating consequences for two of the most iconic figures to ever pick up a microphone.
Okay, let's dive into this. How exactly does a super close bond between two artists completely devolve into a feud that would define an entire era? That's really the central mystery, and honestly, the central heartbreak of this entire explainer. We're going to map out the ultimate breakdown of Biggie Smalls and Tupac Shakur's relationship. We'll track exactly how it went from this deep mutual respect to tragically the deadliest conflict in hip-hop history.
Section 1. Origins of the Rivalry.
Now, to really understand this collapse, we've got to set the stage and look at the foundation of 1990s American hip-hop. Back then, the genre was basically split right down the middle, geographically speaking. On one side, you've got the East Coast, deeply rooted in New York. This scene was all about classic, gritty street realism. In the face of this whole movement, Biggie Smalls, representing Puffy's Bad Boy Records. But then, all the way on the other side of the country, the West Coast was cooking up a totally different sound and culture, known as gangster rap. And Tupac Shakur, he rapidly exploded into the global icon for this movement. So picture this. You've got two massive geographic hubs, two totally distinct stylistic vibes, and two absolute titans leading the charge.
But here is the crazy, dramatic irony of the whole thing. Long before the geography of their record labels fueled this massive competitive tension, Biggie and Tupac were actually really close friends. Seriously, they respected each other's craft, they hung out, they even performed together. So the tension that ended up tearing the hip-hop world completely in half, it didn't start from a place of immediate hatred, not at all. It was just kind of slowly fueled by this growing geographical and corporate divide between the East and West Coasts.
Section 2. The Shattered Friendship.
So, how do we actually get from sharing stages to an all-out war? Well, everything flipped in November of 1994. Their friendship was completely shattered when Tupac was attacked in a New York recording studio. He was tragically shot 5 times and robbed. And crucially, and our source material explicitly points this out, Biggie and Diddy were actually in that exact same recording studio building during the attack. Now, Tupac miraculously survived, but the psychological damage? It was done. Shortly after that whole ordeal, Tupac ended up going to prison on separate charges. And right in the middle of this incredibly sensitive, volatile period, Biggie drops a track called Who Shot Ya?
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the completely different reality Tupac was experiencing in the aftermath. Look, we aren't here to declare objective facts about who did what, but rather to understand exactly how Tupac processed this chain of events. After the shooting, Tupac became absolutely 100% convinced that Biggie knew about the attack beforehand. Because they were so tight, he felt Biggie completely failed to warn or protect him. And then, when Biggie dropped Who Shot Ya?, Tupac, and honestly a lot of the public too, took that song as a direct, intentional taunt about his near-fatal shooting. So strictly from Tupac's perspective, this was the ultimate betrayal. There was just no coming back from it.
Section 3. A War Between Coasts.
Things accelerated so fast, and this personal rift did not stay personal for long. In fact, $1.4 million became the absolute point of no return. That number right there, that was the massive bail amount paid to get Tupac out of prison. And who fronted that kind of cash? Suge Knight, the head of Death Row Records. But listen, this was definitely not charity. It was a highly strategic business move. By paying that astronomical bail, Suge officially signed Tupac to his West Coast label, putting major money behind him and literally drawing definitive battle lines in the sand. When Tupac finally walked out of prison, he was out for revenge. And now he had the full backing of a major label to amplify his voice. And man, did he use it. He released the legendary diss track, Hit 'Em Up. This wasn't just a catchy hip-hop song, it was literally a weapon. In it, he goes after Biggie with some of the most incredibly personal insults you can imagine, and he loudly proclaims that the entire East Coast had betrayed him. Those private suspicions we were just talking about, yeah, they were now very, very public declarations.
Let's take a second to trace how this whole thing snowballed. Step 1, it starts as a really personal dispute fueled by trauma and deep suspicion between two former friends. Step 2, you add millions of dollars, and suddenly it morphs into a massive corporate rivalry between Bad Boy Records on the East Coast and Death Row Records on the West Coast. And then Step 3, it spills out into the streets.
What kicked off inside a recording studio transformed into a terrifying regional war involving fans and, tragically, deeply entrenched street gangs from both sides of the country. The whole shebang had grown completely, utterly out of their control.
Section 4. A tragic end.
The wild escalation we just walked through eventually reached a devastating and sadly almost inevitable climax. And this brilliantly illustrates the terrifying symmetry of how this whole rivalry concluded. The parallels here are honestly just deeply unsettling. In September of 1996, Tupac Shakur was killed in a drive-by shooting in Las Vegas, right after a physical altercation with a gang member named Orlando Anderson. Then, just 6 months later, in March of 1997, Biggie Smalls was killed in Los Angeles. And the circumstances? A nearly identical drive-by shooting while he was leaving an award show. Two monumental figures representing two different coasts, lost to almost exact mirrors of senseless violence. It all culminated in this number right here, 25. Both of these incredible, completely era-defining artists were just 25 years old when they were killed. I mean, just take a second and think about all the music that was never made. Their careers, their lives, their boundless potential, all of it cut incredibly short at the exact same age.
As our source material so soberly points out, if we're trying to tally up the results of this East Coast versus West Coast war, well, there were 0 winners. Nobody came out on top. The world was simply robbed of two of the greatest rappers in history. And when you strip away the music, the money, and all the myths, what actually fueled this profound loss? It was driven by pride, it was funded by corporate greed, and it was destroyed by entirely unnecessary escalation. This tragedy forever changed the music industry, completely rewriting how labels handle artist safety and how corporate money gets involved in personal beefs.
Which brings us to our final thought. The music they left behind is absolutely immortal, but the void they left, that's unmeasurable. It really forces us to ask, when pride, greed, and escalation take over, what is the ultimate cost to art and history? Thank you so much for walking through this explainer with me today. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.